This is the most disturbing murder scene the NYPD ever walked into. The evidence just does not add up. Keep watching and you will see why. It began with a scream behind a locked door. On the night of March 9, 1929, in a quiet Harlem tenement, a neighbor heard a violent struggle erupt inside a tiny laundry. Within minutes, police arrived. The windows were nailed shut. The back door was locked. The front door was bolted from the inside. There was no way in, and supposedly no way out. But someone inside that room had just been shot. When officers finally forced entry, they found the body of a man lying on the floor. He had 2 bullet wounds to the chest, and a third through his hand, the kind of wound a person receives when trying to shield themselves from a gun. The weapon was missing. The cash in his pockets was untouched. And the room that held his body was sealed on all sides. Police studied the scene for hours. They couldn't find a single pathway the killer could have used to escape. And after weeks of investigation, New York's police commissioner gave the case a name that has remained unchanged for nearly a century. A perfect locked room mystery. This is the unsolved death of Isidor Fink. And years later, investigators still cannot explain how it happened. Before his death became a national puzzle, the man behind the mystery lived an unremarkable life. His name was Isidor Fink, a Polish immigrant in his early 30s who had come to America searching for ordinary stability. He ran a small laundry at 4 East 132nd Street in Harlem, a cramped storefront with a single room in the back where he slept. The business was modest, the schedule repetitive. Laundry came in, laundry went out. Fink pressed shirts, folded linens, and walked deliveries through the neighborhood. People who knew him described him as quiet, cautious, and intensely private. His landlord called him a good tenant, hardworking, punctual, and never a source of trouble. But Fink had one quirk that stood out. He was deeply afraid of robbery. Customers said he rarely opened the door to strangers. He kept his windows nailed shut and his doors locked at all times, even while working. He lived alone, had no known family in New York, and no social ties that the police could later uncover. To neighbors, he was polite but distant, a man who seemed always on guard, as if waiting for trouble to find him. He likely never imagined that his cautious habits would one day become the core of a mystery no detective could unravel. The neighborhood around him was changing. In the late 1920s, Harlem was crowded, vibrant, and restless. Small shops like Fink's Laundry were common. One-room businesses run by immigrants chasing opportunity on narrow margins. But this was also a time of rising crime. Protection rackets targeted small stores. Tensions between tenants and landlords grew. And working alone late into the night meant facing the street with little defense. If Fink seemed paranoid, the city around him gave him reason. Locked doors, sealed windows, and constant vigilance were the only security he could afford. On the night of March 9th, Fink followed his usual routine. He worked late, completed a few laundry deliveries, and returned to his room around 10:15 p.m. He locked his door behind him. Nothing about the evening appears unusual. No reported threats. No suspicious visitors. No argument heard from the shop. But around 10:30 p.m., everything changed. A neighbor, a woman living nearby, suddenly heard sounds coming from inside the laundry. Some accounts describe the noise as a struggle. Others recall blows or heavy movement. One version suggests she may have heard a cry for help. Whatever she heard, it convinced her that something violent was happening behind that locked door. She ran to get help. And within minutes, police officers were standing in front of Fink's laundry. What they found made no sense. The front door was bolted from the inside. The back door was locked. All the windows were sealed or nailed shut, just as Fink always kept them. Police tried forcing the doors, but the small shop was reinforced from within. The only opening was a narrow transom window high above the door, too small for an adult to pass through. Knowing seconds mattered, officers broke the glass and boosted a small boy through the opening. The child dropped down inside, reached for the lock, and opened the door from within. Nothing prepared police for what they were about to see. Inside the tiny room, on the floor between the bed and the front area of the shop, lay the body of Isidor Fink. He had been shot 3 times. 2 bullets had struck his chest. A third had pierced his left wrist, the classic mark of someone lifting their hand to shield themselves from a gun. But the strangeness didn't stop there. There was no gun in the room, no discarded weapon, no shell casings, no bullet on the floor. The cash in his pocket was untouched. The money in the shop was still where he kept it. Nothing had been taken. Nothing was overturned. The room was silent. The doors were locked. The windows were sealed. And yet the man inside had unmistakably been murdered. Detectives searched the room inch by inch. They looked for signs of a forced exit. None. They checked the locks, still intact from the inside. They examined every window, all closed, all nailed shut. They dusted the room for fingerprints. Only Fink's were found. There was no suicide weapon, no accidental discharge scenario. No reason for the room to be in the condition it was found. The close-range powder burns on his wrist told investigators that the gun was fired from only inches away. Someone had been standing directly in front of him, but that person had seemingly vanished. Police struggled for explanations. They considered suicide, then dismissed it immediately. They examined the possibility of robbery, but nothing was stolen. They investigated the local extortion rings, but there was no evidence Fink was involved. Witness accounts were limited, and what little they had only deepened the confusion. The neighbor insisted she heard a struggle shortly before police arrived, but no one reported seeing anyone leave. The timeline was so tight that detectives believed the killer would have needed to escape within minutes before the first officer set foot on the doorstep. Yet every possible exit route was sealed from within. As days passed, newspapers across the country reported on the case. Readers were captivated by the paradox. A murder inside a room no killer could have entered, and no killer could have left. Even the police commissioner admitted the truth. There was no solution that fit the evidence. Over the years, investigators and armchair detectives have tried to unravel the mystery. One theory suggests that the killer shot Fink through the transom window, but close-range powder burns make this impossible. The gun was held practically against Fink's skin. Another theory claims the killer escaped through the transom after the shooting, but officers themselves said the opening was too small for an adult, and only a small child could pass through. Others proposed that the killer slipped out before the neighbor reached the door. But witnesses insisted the struggle happened moments before police arrived, leaving no realistic window for an escape. And then there are fringe explanations, mechanical tricks, unusual pressure changes, locking mechanisms. None supported by evidence. More grounded analysts believe the answer is simpler but unprovable. Fink may have opened the door to someone he knew. An argument or attempted extortion escalated. The wrist wound came from a desperate attempt to shield himself. And in the chaos, the killer slipped out, the door fell shut, and in the confusion of the moment, it appeared locked from within. But even this explanation struggles with the physical evidence. There is no clear way to recreate the locked condition of the door without leaving behind some sign of manipulation. And after almost a century, the truth remains untouchable. The investigation stalled quickly. Forensics in 1929 were limited. There were no DNA tests, no modern ballistic techniques, and no security cameras. Fink lived a quiet life, free of enemies or clear motives. There were no suspects to interrogate, no informants offering leads, and no one with a compelling reason to kill a man who seemed invisible to the world. Within months, the case faded into the background of New York crime files. Witnesses moved away. Evidence was lost. And time did what it does to unsolved mysteries. It sealed the story permanently. The police commissioner eventually called the case insolvable. He wasn't wrong. Today, the murder of Isidor Fink is cited in criminology textbooks, mystery discussions, and detective fiction circles as one of the purest real-life locked-room murders ever recorded. Unlike fictional locked-room puzzles, this one has no clever twist, no hidden trapdoor, no magician's misdirection, just a quiet man lying dead in a sealed room. Nearly 100 years later, his story remains a cold case with no answers. Only a timeline that refuses to align with the laws of logic. A man alone, a scream in the night, a locked room, 3 bullets, no weapon, no killer, and the disturbing realization that sometimes the most impossible mysteries are the ones that actually happened. If you like real stories that feel impossible, this is only one of many. There are other rooms that should have been airtight, other crimes that shouldn't have been possible, and other people who died in ways that defy basic logic. If you want to hear those stories too, subscribe, leave a like, and tell me which theory you believe. Because somewhere, buried in the details, there may be an answer. And until we find it, this will remain one of New York's most impossible murders.